Welcome, everyone. I am Bob Wurzelbacher, the director of the Respect Life Office for the Archdiocese of Cincinnati, and this is our new video podcast series that we call Being Pro-Life. Each month, we'll discuss a different topic in the Respect Life arena. We'll hear the personal story from someone greatly affected by that issue. And finally, we'll share ways that you can get involved. Today's topic is assisted suicide. We have a special guest with us today. Will you please introduce yourself?
My name is Kristen Hanson. I'm a community relations advocate with the Patients' Rights Action Fund, and our main goal is to fight the legalization of assisted suicide. This is not something that I would have normally been advocating for or against, but back in 2014, my husband JJ and I, we were both in our early 30s. We had just had our 1-year-old son, James, and we like to say that we were living the American dream. Then suddenly, on May 13th, I was playing with James in the living room, and my phone rang, and I saw it was JJ's cell phone, which was strange because he didn't usually call me while he was working. And when I answered it, a woman answered the phone. And she told me that JJ had just had a grand mal seizure. They didn't know why. They had taken him to the ER. He wasn't able to speak for at least a good hour after it happened. And so they said, you need to get to the ER as soon as you can. And he was admitted overnight. And the next morning, the neurologist came in and he said, I'm so sorry, but you have 2 lesions on your left temporal lobe. We need to do a biopsy to find out what it is. We're going to transfer you to our sister hospital because we don't do brain surgery here. And that was the beginning of our crazy 4 years where we found out JJ had glioblastoma multiforme, which is the most aggressive form of brain cancer and arguably the most aggressive form of cancer, period. I can't even begin to put into words how overwhelming the whole thing was. So he went and he had the surgery. The neurosurgeon came out. He said, I'm so sorry, but it looks like cancer. It's inoperable because of where it's located. It's right on his speech center. So if we tried to operate, the chances of him losing all of his speech and understanding are too high. And so he said, enjoy the time that you have left together. And that was it.
Yeah.
No, why don't you go for another opinion somewhere else? We're a small regional hospital. There's large brain cancer centers that might be able to operate. None of that was suggested. But as a patient and as his caregiver and advocate, it was horrifying to see how different your care could be if you don't have someone there advocating on your behalf. But thankfully, we agreed that we needed to get other opinions. JJ is a Marine at heart, and he wasn't going to just accept that prognosis without doing his best to fight. And so JJ's dad is a cancer survivor himself, and he had gone to Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York. We met with the neurosurgeon there, and that neurosurgeon, he said, no problem, we've got this. We do 3 of these a day. I have a safe access route to the tumor, and we can do it next week. And they were able to remove the 2 tumors that they saw. And thankfully, there was a 3rd tumor behind the other 2 that we didn't know about, and they were able to remove that one as well. But unfortunately, with this cancer, even if you remove the tumors, it has like tentacles that weave out into the brain, so you can't remove all of it. The cancer cells are still there. So even if you have a successful surgery, even if you do chemotherapy and radiation, which is the standard of care, almost always the cancer comes back. So he decided to do standard treatment. He did radiation and chemotherapy. He went through periods right after the surgery where he couldn't walk, talk, read, or write. Recovery was very slow for him because of seizures he was having as a complication of the surgery. He seemed to be responding to the treatments, although it was a difficult few months. Then in September, so just a few months later, he caught a cold that we all had, but because his immune system from the treatments was struggling, he was in bed for almost a month.
Wow.
It was during that time that we didn't know, but later he shared with us that he was really depressed, and he questioned whether it was worth fighting. He wondered if he was being a burden to us as a family. Would it just be easier if he gave up and just passed? And we didn't know that at the time. We just thought he was physically ill and he was staying in bed. But he later shared that with us. And it was a month later when we saw Brittany Maynard on TV.
Right. Brittany Maynard was a pretty well-known story back when she received a terminal cancer diagnosis. If our listeners don't know about her story, and she chose to move to Oregon because assisted suicide is legal there in order to be able to end her life.
We were horrified the way the media was glamorizing her story. Every article you read, every interview you saw, it was that if you have terminal cancer, especially hers, there's nothing you can do. It was spreading this message of helplessness and hopelessness. And we saw, going through what we had gone through, how the one thing you need the most is hope in those times. We're using these carefully crafted euphemisms to hide the fact that assisted suicide is still suicide.
So JJ's now feeling a lot better. He's exercising. He doesn't appear to have cancer anymore.
Right.
And the Brittany Maynard case comes on, and the two of you realize that this is not the kind of message that is probably most helpful to the world right now. You have a different message. So what did you start doing then?
So we didn't have anything planned. We just knew we wanted to share our story. So we started locally. People heard about our story, and we were eventually put in contact with someone who knew the Patients' Rights Action Fund, this organization that fights the legalization of assisted suicide. When they heard our story, the president of the organization at the time, Greg, called us and said, "Can we come do a video? We'd like to help share your message, your story of hope with the world." When I saw the final video, it was beautiful. It was exactly what we hope others who are struggling with something like this would see.
So maybe right now would be a good time to show that video you're talking about that you made for the Patients' Rights Action Fund. I'm going to share that video here. We'll turn on this screen and we'll hit play and we'll let our audience see this for a moment.
My family has had a motto someone would complain about. I can't go out to school today because I'm sick. And my dad's response would be, "You can't hurt steel."
Life couldn't have been more perfect. We had just had James. He was 1 year old. We had moved to Florida.
We were living what people would consider as the American dream.
My phone rang and I saw it was JJ's number on my caller ID. And I answered it, and a woman's voice was on the phone. She was a paramedic. She was with JJ. He had had a grand mal seizure.
Grade 4 glioblastoma multiforme, which is one of the, if not the deadliest form of brain cancer that exists. You have 4 months to live. In a best case scenario, you may get a year. Would this be easier if I just gave up? If I just said, this is too much of a burden on my family? What if I just said I had enough and ended it? I would be okay the next day because I would be gone. I wouldn't feel the pain. I wouldn't feel the emotion. They do. My wife would feel it for the rest of her life. My son would not have one more day to spend with me.
No matter how bad those days were, we had to fight for James. James makes us stronger.
I still have cancer today. I still have active cancer cells. I'm still on chemo. And I have people say all the time, "You don't look like it. You don't look like you have active cancer." It's because every single part of my day I spend towards improving my ability to live.
I'd say my biggest fear with assisted suicide is that a patient will go to a doctor who already views them as a terminal patient and sees little hope for anything else.
We had one doctor that told us that, "Go home, enjoy the time you have left." And yet another doctor said, "We got this, no problem, we'll get it out." That was a year ago that we were told that. Unless a cure is found, the disease will come back. When and how, I don't know. My hope and my fight is to keep it at bay for as long as possible.
You are more my hero now than I ever thought possible. And I love you, and you're my best friend.
Every single day is a gift, and you can't let that go.
I feel awful for making you watch that,
It's a tough one.
but it's certainly a powerful story and video that shows the love that you have for each other. It's a little taste, I guess, of how special of a man JJ was.
And that was the beginning of us getting involved with the Patients' Rights Action Fund. JJ's background was very tailored to him becoming eventually the president of the Patients' Rights Action Fund. What happened was after he met Greg was going to be leaving as the president, and JJ was a Marine Corps officer. He had worked for 2 New York governors. He had a master's in public administration. He was very eloquent and familiar with the issue. So when Greg was looking to leave, he asked if JJ would come on as the president of the Patients' Rights Action Fund. And so that became the beginning of JJ working nationally to share his story to fight against the legalization of assisted suicide. So although it was difficult to go out and advocate against assisted suicide, it was so important to us to do that. If we could help save even one other person's life from someone who could live that would have given up hope otherwise, we knew that we had to do that because these laws are so dangerous for so many reasons.
Why don't we talk about that a little bit? No one is going to watch that video and say, well, he should have just killed himself. The argument is, of course, that people should have the choice to be able to, if they want to. So what is the danger in that?
So something that JJ always liked to focus on is that this isn't about one person's choice. These laws impact everyone. Proponents like to say this won't impact anyone else except the person who's deciding that this is what they want to do, but that isn't the case. These laws are dangerous. One of the primary reasons is because we have a profit-driven healthcare system. And so when you introduce assisted suicide in as a legitimate medical treatment, which it's not, then you have these insurance companies who are looking at their bottom line. And I don't know about you, but I don't trust them to do the right thing. They're going to do the cheapest thing.
Right. And it isn't even necessarily painting insurance company as awful. It's just that if you have a societal acceptance of very inexpensive treatment to be an acceptable option versus an enormously more expensive treatment, drugs that will kill you versus chemotherapy, then you're always going to try to figure out how to convince as many people as you can that the cheaper option is the better option.
Oh, in Oregon, where assisted suicide has been legal the longest, proponents like to say that there have been no cases of coercion or abuse in Oregon, but that's not true. There's a woman named Barbara Wagner. You can find her videos on the internet. And she was fighting cancer early on when these laws first became legalized there. And the Oregon Health Plan sent her a letter saying that they were denying her coverage for her chemotherapy, but they were offering her assisted suicide instead. Now, she went to the media and there was a big public backlash against the insurance company for doing that. So the insurance company stopped sending the letters, but it still happens.
Wow.
So just because there's no written documentation of it in the form of these letters, they're too smart to do that anymore. It doesn't mean it's not still happening. This is not about one person's choice. When we make a decision as a society, we have to look at all the people that this is going to impact. And for the reasons that we discussed, that it's going to impact our healthcare system as we know it, that hospice and palliative care are something we should be looking to improve, not take away by adding this as a medical treatment in lieu of that. And whether it's intentional or not, that's what's going to happen.
People want to get involved and learn more about your work. They can go to patientsrightsaction.org. I'm going to share that screen for just a moment. I know if you're listening to the blog, you can't see that, but we're at that website. So what might we see on your website from here?
To access the videos, you would want to go to the menu bar on top and you go to Tools. And then the second choice is Videos. And there we have a variety of videos that you can select to view.
It's a great way to get started on hearing some stories of people affected by that issue. What else can we find on your website?
Our primer right under Tools, which is a beautiful document that we put together in collaboration with DREAD-F, which is a disability rights advocate for individuals with disabilities. And there you will have all kinds of stories, research, data to dive deeper into why these laws are so dangerous for not only patients with terminal illness, but individuals with disabilities, including mental illness.
So why don't we go back to your story?
Sure.
Again, okay, so JJ does not appear to have cancer at this point. He's president of the Patients' Rights Action Fund.
So he was diagnosed in May 2014, and he started with the Patients' Rights Action Fund in September of 2015. So it was a little less than a year and a half later. And he traveled the country for almost a year and a half before we found out that his cancer had come back. So again, he wanted to do what he could to try to fight the cancer. So he had more radiation, and he went on another clinical trial for a new immunotherapy. And it was from that point he needed a second brain surgery in December of 2016. And even though he was going through treatments and still fighting cancer, he felt so passionately about this that when he was well enough, he continued to speak publicly and travel to share his story and fight assisted suicide.
So think of the concern for society. Think of how natural it is for us to care for a helpless child, and how it shouldn't be any different caring for our parents or our elderly.
And I would say, advocate for yourself, advocate for your loved ones. We were able to get JJ the best medical care that we could while it was working. And when it was time and we knew, he ended up living 6 months where he had no treatment, because we didn't want to give him futile treatment that we knew there was little likelihood it would actually cure or slow down his cancer at that point. And so we're not saying that you have to do treatment until the very end if that's not what you want. As a family, come together, figure out what is best for you, and then make sure you advocate for those resources like hospice and palliative care, and treasure the time that you have together.
Right, and get the word out about this positive message about how important it is to take care of those who are vulnerable and at the end stages of life, and not have us give in to a lack of hope.
Absolutely.
All right, well, thank you, Kristen, for spending your time with us today. Have a wonderful day, and we'll talk to you next time.
Terrific. Thank you. Have a wonderful
Bye.
day.
Goodbye.